Hi, EJ here. Welcome back to NonCompete. I'm about 41 years old, and I don't feel old, but I guess I'm getting old. And I guess that also means that the internet is getting old, from my perspective. So when I was growing up in the 90s, until I was around 11 or 12 years old in middle school, I didn't even really know what the internet was. And then Windows 95 came out. My family got a computer like millions of other families in that year, around 1995. And I got online for the first time. And it just blew my mind. It opened up my eyes to a world that I didn't know existed. It opened up my eyes to the world. I was talking to people and learning things from people from all around the world. And the promise of the internet was very real in those days. And I got very quickly interested in something that at the time we were calling the prosumer movement. I really can't find much information from Googling this, but I remember that magazines, like computer magazines and filmmaker magazines and that sort of thing, they talked frequently about this idea of a prosumer movement. And the idea of the prosumer movement is very simple. It's just this idea that people as consumers would become producers as well, and that production and consumption would become one process. People were talking about this in the context of filmmaking back in like the late 90s. And then I remember there was also conversations to this effect about a decade or so ago when 3D printers started to become a thing. The promise of both of those movements, technologies, never came to fruition. But when I was in high school and I was dreaming of becoming a filmmaker, I truly believed that the internet would open the doors to filmmaking to the world. And what I believed, and lots of other young filmmakers believed at that time, was that independent film was the future. That independent voices would have absolutely nothing stopping us from coming forward and taking over the media landscape. I remember in this time in the 90s and coming into the early 2000s, independent film was kind of a big deal. There was Quentin Tarantino coming onto the scene. Robert Rodriguez had written a really influential book that I read when I was very young. And everyone seemed to think that Miramax and Searchlight and all these kind of indie-oriented film companies were the future, at least in the circles that I was running in. And I thought that the internet was going to make a world where anyone that had vision and talent could go buy a camera and get online and share the films that we made with the world. And there are some examples early on that I saw happen in real time, such as, for instance, Tim and Eric. Okay, if you've ever heard of the comedy duo Tim and Eric, I was a fan of Tim and Eric when they just had a little website that they built themselves. They had no connections to anyone in Hollywood, and they were just putting out videos. And I was watching these videos and enjoying them when they were nobodies. Then they famously sent their reel to Bob Odenkirk. Bob Odenkirk was a famous comedian from show, Mr. Show and various other projects. And Bob Odenkirk kind of discovered them, helped them make a connection with Adult Swim. They got really, really big. The rest is history. I watched all this happen in real time in the early 2000s when I was in college. And I even was able to, correspond with Tim and Eric and DJ Doug Pound and the rest of their crew. I even won a song contest, the Hats Off to You song contest. And I, made a little song on my accordion and sent that in through their website, not their Twitter, not their Facebook, their website. They had this online community, this forum on their website, and I was participating in that. And it was really exciting. It was exciting to watch Tim and Eric kind of make it big and break out. And there were a lot of things like that happening. There were things like that happening with music. I had a lot of friends that were really into music, and this was the era of indie music and garage bands, and everyone felt like this DIY culture was really going to take over. And I thought that was the future. I thought that this would give us a free speech explosion. I thought that voices that would otherwise have been ignored would be elevated through the internet. And then social media came along. Corporate social media, YouTube, and Facebook, and Twitter came along and changed everything for the worse. See, what I never saw coming, what none of us saw coming back in those days, was the rise of the algorithm. Back in those days, if you wanted to watch Homestar Runner, which is another really early example of independent media that just took off like wildfire, spread throughout the youth culture. When I was in college, everyone was watching Homestar Runner, and these were just a couple of brothers that were making these cartoons on their computer, the same kind of computer that I had in my dorm room. It made it feel like anything was possible. Then enter YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. Things just started to change, and they changed so slowly I didn't even notice it happening. The algorithm took over. We were no longer, back in the early days, in my early days of the internet, information was spread from friend to friend, from somebody I knew in my social network would send me a link, and on AOL Instant Messenger, and I would click it, and I would enjoy it, and I would send it to my friends, and that's how things went viral early on. There was no corporate presence involved in this process. It was all organic. It was all human interaction, social interaction. And Facebook and Twitter and YouTube changed that slowly, but very surely, until we had what we have today, which is a corporate algorithm environment. When I was young, in my early 20s, there was something called RSS. It still exists. In fact, if you listen to podcasts get shared through this RSS system. In fact, every YouTube channel, unless they've changed it, has an RSS feed. What RSS is it's a technology that allows you to build your own timeline of media from various sources, blogs, podcasts, YouTube channels, website updates, that sort of thing. Anything on the internet that gets updated frequently can have an RSS feed, and you can subscribe to RSS feeds through various applications. Early on, the very best RSS app was made by Google. And once Google decided they wanted to enter the social media algorithm space, they ended the RSS project. They wanted to take that control over the content you consume away from you. They want to be in control of the algorithm. They want to control what gets put in front of you. The power of the algorithm is the power of speech and communication in our current era. And to say that platforms like Google and Twitter don't have tremendous power and control over speech would be an absurdity. I don't think anybody could make that claim. I would even argue that these corporations have more control over speech and what gets heard in our society than the government, because the government doesn't decide what words can and can't be spoken in a YouTube video. In fact, in the USA, at least for the time being, constitutionally, they're not allowed to ban certain words from being said in a YouTube video. But YouTube most certainly does that. Right now, in Palestine, something horrible is happening. It's something that we have a word for, and I am not permitted to use that word in this video. Oh, I'm allowed to put it in a video and upload it. I could say it right now, and you know the word I'm thinking of. It starts with a G, it ends with aside. I can't say that word because if I do, this video will be demonetized, and in my experience as a professional YouTuber, as cringe and embarrassing as it is to describe myself in that way, that's what I am, the video will get shadow banned in some way or another. When I've used that word in the last year or two, every video I upload that has that word in it gets age restricted or otherwise heavily restricted by the algorithm. If you don't know what age restriction is, it's a death knell for a YouTube video. If your YouTube video gets age restricted, nobody's gonna see it. It can't be seen on a lot of computer networks, like a lot of universities and public libraries and government places, that sort of thing, will not even allow people to watch age-restricted videos. By the way, if your video gets age-restricted, you as a creator don't get informed. And a lot of my backlog of videos have been age-restricted and otherwise shadow banned by the algorithm, to the extent that some of them I've heard people say that they cannot watch it at all on their school computer, they cannot click the like button in some cases, all kinds of weird things. Comments, by the way, disappear way more on my channel than other channels. I have a lot of friends that are YouTubers that don't do political stuff. They don't have, they do have problems with YouTube comments disappearing, but on my channel, I would say fully a fifth of YouTube comments just disappear. Just disappear into the void. And I know that because I'll get a notification on my phone for a YouTube comment, and then by the time I click it to go look at it on YouTube, it's gone. And it's not hidden, because I know that YouTube screens a lot of comments, you know, and you can go and look at the hidden comments and approve or disapprove them or whatever. That's not what I'm talking about. These comments are completely filtered out. Now let's talk about the fact that there's no transparency whatsoever as far as what triggers these content moderation systems, what causes comments to get deleted and filtered out, what causes videos to get shadow banned, etc. There's absolutely no transparency about these systems. There's no way of knowing exactly what causes a video to get age restricted. I have a few little tips for you if you're a YouTuber and you have a video that gets content restricted for whatever reason, and you don't know why, because they don't tell you exactly why. They'll give you a really vague little description. They'll just say like, it violates policies or whatever, you know, like complete non-statements. The first thing you can do is you can upload the first half of the video and see if it gets restricted. And if it does, you know it's the problem is in the first half. And then you can keep segmenting it like that until you narrow it down deductively to whatever the content is offending the robots that YouTube employs to do this work. I used that to find out why one of Luna's videos was getting restricted. And it turned out that it was a photograph of a very famous historical incident in which a Buddhist monk did something to protest the oppression of Buddhists by the puppet government in the southern occupied territory of Vietnam. And I can't describe exactly what I'm talking about, and I cannot show you the picture of what I'm talking about, even though it's a very famous photograph that was in my high school textbook. But we can't talk about or show that historical event. We can't use a word to describe a crime against humanity. We can't have adult conversations about critically important history and current events on this platform. It is authoritarian censorship. If ever in history there has been authoritarian censorship, it's on this YouTube platform. Now, everyone likes to talk about how communists censor free speech, but I can tell you for certain that in Vietnam, I have way more free speech in my daily life than I have on the YouTube platform. I could certainly talk about what's happening in Palestine, and I could certainly talk about history. And I've never had any Vietnamese authorities contact me about any of the things I've said about history or about current events in Vietnam. And I have, by the way, Luna and I have criticized the government of Vietnam in our videos. We've talked about things like corruption and pollution and many other critiques of the government in Vietnam. And neither one of us have ever faced any sort of censorship at all. But with YouTube, I get censored absolutely constantly. With every video I ever try to upload, there's some issue with the censorship. Now, this is not me making some kind of liberal whinge about how I have the right to free speech. You know, this is just a fact of capitalism. It's a material condition of capitalism. If we're going to use these capitalist platforms, then of course they're going to censor our speech when we try to criticize the very worst aspects of capitalism and imperialism. Israel, the entity that is performing the horrible deed that I may not speak the word of, is a project of the capitalist imperialist class. It is supported by the United States of America's capitalist ruling class. And we have to understand that there are going to be material barriers put in place to stop us from resisting this terrible, unspeakably horrible thing that is happening to the Palestinian people. That is the nature of capitalism. Capitalism is censorious. The ruling class throughout the history of class struggle has had control over the means of information production and dissemination, and they have controlled the ideology, the prevailing ideology of society. So it is our job as communists to, yes, build a counterculture, try to build platforms where this censorship doesn't take place. And by the way, I'm very proud to say that NonCompete has been a member of the Means TV cooperative since pretty much the very beginning. So you can go watch all of our videos uncensored over at Means TV. But we also have to understand that things like Means TV, as wonderful as they are and as glad as I am that they exist, they're never going to have the reach or spread of YouTube because they don't have the funding, they don't have the money that YouTube has as a massive global corporate entity. These are the challenges we face as communists. And we have to understand that the very notion of the right to freedom of speech that we have in our silly little constitution doesn't mean anything, and it's never meant anything, okay? What we have to understand is that we can leverage things like this, we can leverage the courts, we can leverage the laws to try to give ourselves as much advantage in our position as possible. But to think that we have some kind of magical, mystical right to free speech under capitalism is just silly, idealist dreaming that only a liberal would fall for. The fact is, if we want to talk about things, and if we want to change things, it means we have to build a material base of power for our movement. And that means we have to go out and change the minds of our fellow workers and get them on board with the project of building revolutionary communism. And that extends to the situation in Palestine as well. If we want to be able to affect change in Palestine, talking about it is important because we have to educate people about what's happening there, but that's just the beginning. Building social consciousness is of vital importance because it is through building class consciousness that we build the will and the momentum and the social forces that will bring about revolutionary change. Until we can do that, we don't have the power to change any of the things that we want to change, including the rules about platforms like YouTube. You know, I'd like to say how we could fix YouTube. It would be really wonderful if it was transparent, if you could tell what the hell's going on with YouTube. I mean, I laugh every month when I get a notification that says, hey, check your payment from YouTube, go check it, make sure it's accurate, because there's no way for me to, how am I gonna know if it's accurate or not? I don't know if they're telling the truth in the report about how many ads they ran and how much I'm getting paid per ad. They could absolutely, completely fabricate those numbers, and I would have absolutely no way of auditing those numbers. There's no transparency about how we get paid for the labor that we do as creators on this platform. And there's certainly no transparency about how policies like community guidelines are enforced. They're not enforced the same from one channel to the next. I know that there are a lot of really big channels that can say words that I can't say, that can show footage and images that I can't show, but I don't know why. I don't know how they get a pass and I don't on those things. There's no transparency. There's no democracy whatsoever. We don't get to vote on these policies. We don't get to have any say. We don't have any say as creators in these policies. It's authoritarian. It's everything that the capitalist apologists like to say communism is. You know, it's always projection. All of these tired, old critiques of communism that you hear, anything that they could say about how horrible communism is, it's always something that's a deep and growing problem in the structure of capitalism every single time. And I just think it's funny. But we have ways around it. We're clever. We have energy and dynamism. And I've been seeing young people finding ways to talk about what's happening in Palestine. And I've seen young people tap into some of that old school internet spirit to spread the word about what's happening in Palestine and all the other different really important things we need to be hearing about these days. I have faith in young people to build consciousness together, to educate each other. And I guess I want to give you some encouragement and let you know that you're being gaslit by the world. You're told growing up that you have freedoms. You're told you have freedom of speech. You're told that everybody's equal. You're told that the United States of America is a force for good in the world and a force for liberation. But then you get confronted with these realities. You can't say whatever you want on YouTube. And I'm not even talking about anything harmful. I'm not talking about calling for any harm for anybody or anything. I'm talking about just describing what's happening. you can't describe what's happening in the world right now on these platforms. You get gagged if you try to state simple facts about current events. I can't tell you how important it is. It's so outrageous that this is happening in Palestine right now, and we can't talk about it frankly and openly. The future generations of humanity will look back and judge the people who run YouTube very harshly for this, because they are burying speech and information about a horrendous atrocity. And that means that they are facilitating and enabling it. In my opinion, the people who run YouTube have as much responsibility for what's going on as Israel, because they are collaborating with Israel to facilitate what's happening. If you don't allow people to share the truth about what's going on, to have frank, adult, informed discussions about these activities, and I hate that I have to speak with euphemism about this, what does that say about you? What does that say about your relationship with the state of Israel? You are facilitating a crime against humanity. YouTube is facilitating, enabling, materially supporting a crime against humanity that I cannot speak the name of. Disgusting. Disgusting. This is a hamper on human society. This is a hamper on justice, I can't, there's no words to describe how. Imagine if during World War II, they found the evidence of what was going on, of what the Germans were doing to Jewish people, which again, I can't describe in any way whatsoever. I can't use the word that describes what I'm talking about, but you know what I'm talking about. Imagine if, when the Allied forces discovered that information, all the news corporations of the day, all the newspapers and news film reel producers and all those corporations did not allow that information to get out, did not allow images to get out, did not allow people to describe it for what it was. That's the reality we're living in right now. It's disgusting.
Another thing I should mention is that when YouTube does this to content creators, when they punish people for using words, when they age restrict or demonetize YouTubers for the responsible use of language to describe current events and historical events, that has huge impact over what kind of content gets made, what people choose to talk about. A lot of creators have probably tried to talk about these sorts of things, have tried to engage in a responsible way with their audiences to spread the word about things that are happening in the world. And then YouTube age restricted, demonetized, deplatformed them in various ways. And they learn from that. That has an impact on the kinds of things that they will discuss moving forward. And I know that I, as a creator, have had to police the way that I speak about things and describe things in many of my videos. I've had to try to find ways to communicate ideas to my audience that are indirect, that are less powerful, less impactful. It weakens the message that we try to deliver in our videos. And that's all by design. That is the point of it all. The point is to censor, to limit, to discourage, to serve as an impediment and a hindrance to sharing truth about what's happening in the world.
In a YouTube video. And it can make you feel like you're out of touch with reality. It can make you feel like you're crazy, but you're not. You live in an unjust society and you're oppressed by a ruling class that engages in atrocities and wants you to shut up about them. And the solution to this problem that you are grappling with in your day-to-day existence is connecting with your fellow members of the working class, organizing into parties and workers' unions, building systems of communication that we control, and educating ourselves. There's a lot of terrible things happening in the world right now, and you're not going to find out about the nitty-gritty of it all through corporate media. And unfortunately, even on channels like this, there are limitations to what I can say to you, to what I can share with you, to what I can express to you. Because at the end of the day, freedom of speech is an illusion. It's a lovely concept, that is not synthesized into reality for the overwhelming majority of working people. If you thought this was an interesting video, I have another video on Elon Musk, the man who bought free speech, talking about how and why he bought Twitter and what that means in the context of this whole philosophy of free speech. So you can check that out if you'd like. Be sure to subscribe if you want to hear more from us here at NonCompete. For now, thanks so much for watching. Take care of each other. We'll see you next time.